All right, everybody, what's going on? Full Court Trap Podcast solo edition tonight. As you can see, I, Luke Tackett, am by myself for this one. And we've got quite a bit to discuss surrounding my team, the Kentucky Wildcats. It's been a little bit rocky recently. You see the video title, the Mark Pope honeymoon era. I think it's safe to say that it's come to a screeching halt, at least for now. Rough couple of games for the Cats recently. And really, the whole reason I'm here by myself tonight is just because I wanted to talk about this from a strictly fan perspective. Obviously, if you've been tuned into the podcast since November, everybody knows that I'm a UK fan through and through. I've always been upfront about it, and I stray away from any kind of bias when it comes to talking about hoops with you all because I'm a college basketball hoops enthusiast as well. I love college basketball. It's been a sport that I've grown up on and I've loved my whole life. And Kentucky basketball just happens to be my team, and I'm pretty passionate about it. And I have a pulse of the fan base, I'd like to think. So, wanted to get here and talk about this. 4 out of the last 5, they've been L's for Mark Pope after he got off to the tremendous start earlier in the year, racking up wins against the likes of Duke, Gonzaga, Florida, Mississippi State. I mean, the list goes on and on. Got the rivalry win against Louisville. It's 6-1, I believe, against quad one opponents so far this season. All of those are top 15, I believe. 5-1, excuse me. 5-1 against top 15, but 2-6 against 16 through 90 in Ken Palm. It's been a little bit of a roller coaster ride for Mark Pope. He plays up to his competition level, but then his team also has a tendency to kind of play down to their competition level as well in some instances. And that's been on full display as of recently. I mean, this skid, it started all the way back on January 18th, that 102-97 loss to Alabama. Thrilling game, really. I mean, nothing to complain about if you're a Kentucky fan besides that the result wasn't what you wanted. Obviously, giving up 100 plus, not a good sign. I mean, defense, that's an issue for this team. There's no denying it. I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. But Alabama, far and away the better team, I believe. They're up there with some of the title contenders in the country. Not to say that Kentucky can't be if they get fully healthy, excuse me, which I believe they possibly could be. I don't know if they can hit that extra gear, but Alabama, yeah, that speaks for itself. The loss to Vandy though, 69-74. You were up 6 points with a little bit of time left. Really should have finished that game off, let it slip. Crucial turnovers. That was the last game Lamont Butler participated in. And since then, there was the win against Tennessee, obviously. Tennessee shot 45 threes that game and only made 11. So that kind of played into Kentucky's hands, but nonetheless, good win. But then the one that everybody was talking about, the Arkansas game, when John Calipari came back to Rupp Arena with a chorus of boos, whole arena against him, back against the wall, a team that had been really, really subpar up to that point. And they went into Rupp and they put up 89 points and came away with a 10-point dub where they really controlled the entire second half. And I think that's when this kind of like, oh, hold on, we got to pump the brakes here. When it comes to Mark Pope's praises, I think that's where it began. Because I've always thought at the beginning of the year when you looked at this schedule, you would say with the expectations and the roster put together that there was a chance for a quality year. I don't know if people thought it would start off as good as it did with the win against Duke, which positioned themselves to where they are right now, sitting as a top 15 team in the country, subject to change, though, because they just lost to Ole Miss, which I'll talk about afterwards. But when you looked at this schedule, I think really the one game fans had circled, highlighted, whatever, the Arkansas game. I mean, John Calipari, obviously a bitter taste in the mouth after the Oakland loss last year, and then he goes to a conference rival, gets to come back not even a year removed from that. That was a game that the fans wanted badly, and I think that's a game that, honestly, Mark Pope kind of undermined the importance of that, I think. He's always praised that he understands the assignment and he knows the importance of the Kentucky jersey. But I think that game might be the first time that I can say he didn't really understand the assignment. I mean, the whole week there was the coaches speak, this is just another game. We appreciate what Cal did, but it's a competition. But for Arkansas, you could just tell with their intensity that it wasn't another game. They wanted to go out there and get one for their coach, specifically Adu, DJ, and Big Z. they obviously had tremendous games, arguably the best game of DJ Wagner's collegiate career, if you ask me. And then Billy Richmond and Carter Knox stepped up. John L. Davis, he's starting to turn into the guy that you expected him to be if you're an Arkansas fan. All those guys really rallied behind Cal and wanted to get that done. And, I mean, they deserved it. They played out of their minds, and they were talking some trash after the game to the fans, too. So I think that really shows that they wanted to go in there and be like, okay, you're going to boo our coach and you're going to try and underplay what he did for you all. Here's an L. Like, enjoy that one. And I really think that's what happened there. I think Arkansas needed that game more so than Kentucky, and they wanted it as well. And you got to give kudos to Cal. I mean, that was a vintage Cal performance right there. He pulled out all the bells and whistles for that one, did everything he could to get it done, and he did, and he handled it with grace as well. I'll give him credit. In the post game, he was very complimentary of Mark Pope and the job that he's done. But that was a little bit of a morale blow, I think, if you're a Kentucky fan and an advocate of Mark Pope's. Now, that's not to say that he's the wrong hire by any means, because he's not. I've seen you people on Twitter, some of you all, they're going off the deep end, saying, did we make the wrong choice here? Well, no, it's year one of a new tenure, guys. Like, let's relax. And then follow that Arkansas game up. Ole Miss loss, very disappointing. I mean, lack of effort all around. Got down big early, could never really overcome that, even with the late surge. Ole Miss, quality team. But I think that if you're a Kentucky fan, a Kentucky player, you thought that that would be a bounce-back spot for you because you might have a better overall roster than Ole Miss. But Ole Miss, I mean, they shot the lights out. And that's a trend that I want to point to here because I've seen some people make the argument, well, these teams are having the games of their lives against Kentucky. Like Arkansas, you see how they came out and shot, and Ole Miss, you see how they did it. Vanderbilt, Alabama, like at some point when you're everyone's best offensive night, that's not really like Kentucky is the Super Bowl moment. Like I hate that analogy. In some ways it's correct. Like, yes, fans do get up for Kentucky. But let's not act like when a really, really good offensive performance happens and it keeps happening and teams keep having their best performances against you, that's a you problem. I mean, this Kentucky team right now is projected as the program's worst ever in terms of KenPom defensive efficiency ratings. And KenPom dates all the way back to 1996. So pretty large sample size at this point, and there have been some bad Kentucky teams in that period, folks. I mean, Billy Clyde, that whole era, the COVID team, 9-16, like there is a ton to look back on here, and to see that this team right now is on pace to be the worst. Yeah, no, I don't want to hear any more of this. Will teams get up for Kentucky? No, they don't. They tear Kentucky up because Kentucky's defense is weak. And even with Lamont Butler, this is still a problem. It's been a problem all year. Like in the Alabama game, you give up 100. Alabama, kudos to them. They're one of the best offenses in the country, but still, you can't do that. You give 89 points up to an Arkansas team that was sitting in the bottom half of the SEC in terms of field goal efficiency and shooting percentages. Like, something's got to give here, and I don't know what the solution is if you're Mark Pope, because it's really kind of perplexing when you think about it. Lamont Butler, I mean, when he's healthy, he's the most stable defensive guy on the team. There's no complaints there. But Jackson Robinson, he has the build to be a good defender. It feels like it's a lack of effort at times. Otega Owe as well. He's got the build. He's got the athletic ability. Just not always there. I don't know why, but it's just not always there. Kobe Bryant, not known as a defender. He wasn't brought to Kentucky to play defense. Understandable. But, I mean, across the board, Amari Williams, great paint defender, and can't really complain there. Ansley Almanor, no. Brandon Garrison, not really. Travis Perry, no. Andrew Carr, in moments he can be, but other moments, no. And that's just the frustrating part because there's guys on this roster it feels like you should be getting more of on the defensive end, but you're just not right now. And I don't know if that has to be a scheme switch up by Pope. I mean, I know he said after the Ole Miss game that people were throwing things or breaking furniture in the locker room. Like, I saw somebody on Twitter say, let's take that intensity and apply it to defense. And I wholeheartedly agree. I saw John Henson on the field of 68. He said, Roy Williams, when they were going through some defensive skids, Just take the rims out, and you're only going to practice defense the whole time. And that might just be what Pope has to do here, because, I mean, it's just baffling at this point as to what's going wrong. But then on the flip side, this Kentucky team, they're currently on pace to have the best ever KenPom rating in terms of offense. So there's no denying that this team has the talent and firepower offensively to beat anybody. I mean, you saw them get into a shootout against Florida that was in the 100s. I mean, defense was lackluster again in that one, but they can do that. They put 95 on Mississippi State on the road. They put up 81 on a stout Texas A&M team that's pretty tough and hard-nosed physicality-wise. 90 against Gonzaga, just all across the board, impressive wins. They had the Duke win where it was kind of a not really an ugly game, but 77-72. Not the most high power, but quality win. Excuse me there. And you got Cooper Flagg in his second college game of his career. So I think that was a little bit of you got Duke at the right time thing. But, I mean, nonetheless, you can't take that win away from Mark Pope. But overall, just the struggles against these teams lately, it's just very concerning. And if you want to make the point that, yeah, there's no Lamont Butler, I get it. But when you see the metrics that are as bad as they are, it's just really hard to kind of think that this is all because of one guy. But I will note that another thing that people talk about, they always talk about Lamont Butler. When Kirk Kriisa went down as well, you lost your backup point guard in a time where Lamont was already dealing with something. And then Lamont goes down later in the year. So this is a team that's playing without a point guard right now, truly. Travis Perry, Kentucky kid, he's got potential. I don't think he's ready for the floor general duties as of yet. Colin Chandler, he's had a larger role recently. Don't think he's really been prepared for that as well, but that's a guy that hasn't played basketball in like 2 years now. So you really can't kind of blame him for anything. He's in a situation where he's just trying to learn and survive out there. But yeah, it's a very, very dark outlook for Kentucky right now with these defensive efficiency rankings. But there's plenty of time to get this thing turned around. I mean, we saw earlier today, Mark Pope said that Lamont Butler would be returning to practice, going through some lighter things. I think it was no contact practice maybe or something, the term that he was going through, but starting to ease his way back in. I think the consensus is that he's going to be back in the next week or so. And Kentucky's going through a stretch here where they play against South Carolina at home. They play against Tennessee at home. They go to Texas, and then they're going to host Vanderbilt. And when it comes to the SEC this year, that's about as easy of a stretch as you're going to ask for to get things right after dropping 4 out of your last 5. I think reasonably it's tough to get a read on because Texas, they're so inconsistent, but they've got talent. And with that being on the road, that can be a tricky one. But I feel like in that 4-game stretch, you can argue that you should get 3 wins, maybe the only stain being Tennessee, but they just beat Tennessee in Knoxville, and that was without Lamont. Obviously, Tennessee kind of played into what Kentucky wanted to do in that game. But if you get Lamont back next week at some point and he's able to go on Tuesday night for that one, that's obviously a big help. You look for that one as a possible resume win, and there's going to be a lot of opportunities coming up. They're going to travel to Alabama and Oklahoma. They're going to host Auburn, but it doesn't look like anybody's going to be able to break the Auburn formula, not right now at least, except for Duke. And then they're going to host LSU, and to close out the year, they'll go to Missouri. So lots to look forward to in terms of building your resume back up. I think most projections as of today kind of have them sitting on the 4 seed line. At one point, you were looking at a solid 3 standing with room for a possible 2. Going to take a lot of work to get back to that spot. I think a 2 might be out of the picture by now, but a 3, you could make a case there's still a pathway to that. Just a lot you got to get right. You got to get your squad healthy, most importantly, as well. And you got to survive this SEC because, I mean, Kentucky right now, a top 15 basketball team, they sit at 8th place in this conference. If the SEC tournament started today, Kentucky would be playing on Thursday as an 8th seed, looking ahead to possibly Auburn. And, well, not possibly. Auburn's number 1 right now. You'd be looking at Auburn next game after a battle against a team that's kind of underperformed, but in this league, every team really is quality. I mean, outside of LSU and South Carolina, who I think at this point are pretty safe to bank on them not being in the tournament, there's no off nights. I mean, Arkansas, they showed what they could do against Kentucky. Georgia, they showed it. Vanderbilt, I mean, there's just no off nights in this league. There's never an easy win. There's never a win you can Sharpie in on your schedule. And it's just, this is one of the toughest leagues ever. And the fact that Mark Pope has gone into this league and has done the things that he's done so far, it's very impressive, his coaching ability and where he's going to have this program going. You want to see him pick up some more marquee wins. There's no question about that, because he started off so strong. And that non-conference resume, that's going to be a large part of why they get such a great seed when it comes to the NCAA tournament, for taking out teams like Duke, Louisville, Gonzaga. And then you factor in that they've beaten the Mississippi State team that's very quality. And then they've beaten Florida, who looks like a Final Four contender. Mark Pope, he's done absolutely great things with this program so far. And I definitely think that he's the right guy. And anybody that's questioning that, you got to slow your roll. And you got to look at this from where the program was when John Calipari left it. It was the second week of April. Most of the portal was already kind of situated. The top cream of the crop guys, they kind of were figuring out where they were headed and maybe already committed. And he put together a roster that had depth, experience. What we thought would be defensive ability hasn't really shown yet. And then offensive firepower as well. That's lived up to the billing. The Mark Pope offense is absolutely beautiful. And it's had its stumbles recently with this little skid that they're on. But there's no doubt that he can right the ship here. I mean, there's not really much more you could ask for in year one if you're a Kentucky fan. You want to see them finish this season strong, want to see them maybe try and work their way closer into that top 5 conversation when it comes to the SEC. But that's going to be a tall order, folks. And I mean, it's just really hard to accomplish that when a league is as deep as the SEC is this year. So we'll see how they adjust down the stretch here. It's not going to get any easier, this stretch that they're going to have coming up. A little bit more manageable, as I mentioned. But we'll see how things go. Mark Pope, he's got his work cut out for him. And although Mark Pope does have his work cut out for him to get this thing turned around, there's no doubt in my mind that he's completely capable of doing it. And Kentucky fans, I'd be curious to know, like, what does the fan base consider to be a successful season, a finish here? Is it finding a way to get into the top 5 of the SEC standings? Is it winning a couple of games in Nashville at the SEC tournament? Is it a second weekend appearance? Because for me, if you're Mark Pope, go to Nashville, win a game or two, get out of there, get on to the NCAA tournament, and find a way to make the second weekend. Anything past the Sweet 16 is a tremendous success. Make the second weekend, and I think it's a complete success. And obviously, a lot of the expectations have to be dependent on the health of Lamont Butler. Kerr Kriisa, no clue if he's going to come back or not. There's still the possibility that he will make a return. It's kind of iffy right now, looking maybe more towards medical redshirting and coming back next year, which I would not be opposed to at all. But if you get Lamont Butler healthy, I think a reasonable finish for this Kentucky Wildcats team. Second weekend in March, and then find your way into the semifinals in Nashville. And Kentucky fans, they will pack Nashville. They've been doing it for years now. That used to be the Kentucky Invitational there for a while. They haven't won one now since 2018. And I don't know if this is going to be the year for them to take it back just because of how loaded the conference is, and it really feels like it's Auburn's to lose at this point. But we'll see. I mean, anything happens once you get into postseason play. But Mark Pope, although the honeymoon phase, I do think is a bit of a rough spot. There's no denying that he's the man for the job. I mean, he's came in. He hasn't shied away from the expectations. He's delivered big-time wins. He's built a quality offensive identity. The defense is just going to have to find its way. And most importantly, he resonates with the fans. I mean, he understands the assignment, as he says. He wore the jersey. He understands the passion that comes behind it, the fans, what they want to see. And whenever things are going south, he says that we're not meeting the standard like he did recently. He said Kentucky's not meeting the standard after this rough game against Ole Miss and Arkansas. So he doesn't shy away from anything this job has to offer. And that was one thing. If you do want to have your criticisms about Cal, he always did say it takes a certain kind of guy to handle the Kentucky job. And Cal was that for a while. I think towards the end he really wasn't, but this program has been handed off to a guy that is more than capable of being able to do it. I'll be really excited to see what happens next year. Not trying to move on from this season, obviously, because there's still plenty of untapped potential. But when he gets a roster of his freshman guys mixed with a portal class, first year of really having his roster and not just something that's thrown in from the portal like this year, it's going to be exciting. I mean, for what he was thrown into in this offseason to be where we're at right now with Kentucky, where we're really looking at this team's resume right now that, to be honest, is very quality besides the loss to Arkansas, which was a quad 2 loss. To see the fans this riled up, it's almost an encouraging thing because it shows that the standard hasn't fluctuated at all. Like, this program is still rolling the way that people expect Kentucky basketball to roll. And I think for the future, it's a great sign as well. National championship or bust expectations. I mean, come on, people. That was never realistic in year one, excuse me. But we'll see how things go. I mean, this group, they've got all the offensive potential in the world. Defensively, got to get some things fixed, but no need to jump off ship just yet. Plenty of opportunities remain. And I think Mark Pope is going to figure this thing out. And it all starts with getting healthy, finding out the defensive issues. But we'll keep talking about the Cats for a while, I'm sure. Heading into March, it's going to be one of the bigger stories. How Pope handles the pressure of being the Kentucky coach during March. He's still going to be chasing his elusive first tournament win. Obviously going to be a big storyline, and I'm excited to see how the rest of this year goes because this group's been a joy to watch so far this year. They brought back the joy that kind of got lost at that Oakland defeat last spring, and they've really just reamped this fan base's energy, and I think it's a really good sign for times to come. Mark Pope, I mean, fantastic job, my man. No complaints from me, but this has been a rough spot, and obviously it needs to be talked about. But if there's anybody to figure it out, it's Mark Pope. He's going to right the ship, and Big Blue Nation, everything's going to be all right. Just keep the faith, keep the hope in Pope. The Cats are going to figure it out.